Hello to my air signs, Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. Welcome to the Gemini full moon. You'll find the timestamps for your rising signs listed below. Hello Libra rising, welcome to your horoscope for the Gemini full moon happening on Monday, November the 27th at 8:16 p.m. if you're in the Southern Hemisphere with me. And if you're very close by to me on the globe, this full moon will be exact at moonrise. So if you can remember at 8:16 p.m, take a look over to the eastern horizon and watch the moon rise, because it will be fullest, and there might be some great conversations that you can have with that moon in order to release what is being urged to be let go of. It has been a very difficult Scorpio season, as I'm sure that you can attest all too sincerely, Libra rising. The planet Mars was cazimi with the sun on the 18th of November, I believe, so about a week ago. And this starts off a new Mars cycle. So what that means is that over the next 2 years, it takes 2 years for Mars to complete one route around the zodiac. The intention that Mars is bringing with it will have a lot to do with revealing information that has been held on to. Remember that the sign Scorpio doesn't forget anything, and they keep it stored away. They keep it hidden in order to bring it out when the time is right. So Mars is a difficult planet, a difficult energy for a Libra rising or a Libra sun or a Libra moon to really get to understand and to know. There is frustration that Mars can feel in Libra because they're not at home base. They're in the opposite sign of which they belong. And so there is aggression that is there. For you, Libra rising, this Scorpio cazimi happened in your second house of your values, your resources, your access to wealth, and what you do with that in accordance with your values. So maybe we can think about the comfortability that Mars has in Scorpio. Mars rules two signs, Aries and Scorpio. So this is actually quite beneficial for your resourcefulness. But it might be, over the next 2 years, we might see that you're going to zip it and pull out the aces when the time is right. You're making preparation for yourself over this next period. If we recall the dragon's tail swatting away all manner of tangibility in your second house over the last 2 years, that new moon that I unfortunately missed out on giving you a reading for, I was unwell, but that was the beginning moment, the beginning motion of this new cycle. It was quite close to this cazimi too. So let's focus in on Gemini though, because this is a full moon. This is going to be a moment of grand release. There is a lot of emotion brewing. We can really feel that. We can also feel the staccato conversation that Gemini brings with it. There is a multitude of different pathways and thought forms and opinions that are being served up at this time, and it can be maddening if that's an internal action. So for you, Libra rising, Gemini rules your 9th house, which is where we learn about philosophy, astrology, where we travel to expand the mind and look out, expand our horizons, seek. At certain points in our life, the 9th house can really point to, we put down what we know and we publish it, we write about it, we share it with others. So this feels nice. A full moon in a house that is so involved with religion, though, might bring up some trickier points. There might be some tests of faith here, because the sun is in Sagittarius, in your 3rd house of the goddess, of the village, of your local environment, and the languages that you've picked up on, how you have learned about your spiritual practices through voice rather than the written word. I always think about the town healer when it comes to the 3rd. There's something secretive about the 3rd that I really like. But Mars has left Scorpio and has entered Sagittarius, and the day before this full moon will form an exact square with Saturn in Pisces in your 6th house of repetition and of your body, of your health, of your commitment. That's a lot of astro speak. What this means to me is that this full moon, which could be quite abundant in its fervor, there might be some brain waves or some eureka moments that you can feel that you wish to share. But unfortunately, that sun in Sagittarius, the moon in Gemini, is in square with your 6th house of Pisces and Saturn, a boundary and a restriction. Now, this is energy that we're working with for the next couple of years as well. So this reading could almost work as like a preparation for the harder slog coming up. There might be some things about your environment, your village, that are rapidly feeling more and more unsafe. There might be almost like a devotion to your rhythm, to your repetitious nature that could sort of help to bring you back to earth and keep you going. But there might be some sort of conflict about your sort of grander aspirations as far as your spirituality or your language for that is concerned. There might be some sort of roadblock. Saturn and Mars are what we call the malefic planets, which means that they do bring the harsher lessons. And when in a square, when in pressure with one another, it can be tense and it can be really difficult. I'd like you to think back to November of 2021, if you can. And this seems to be like a pretty pivotal part of our recent history, for there's a lot of similarities or ceremonies that we're going through now at this time that echo the ending of 2021. There was a square with Mars and Saturn at that time in Scorpio and Aquarius. So on your birth chart, there was a friction between your sense of values, your money, your resources, and the way that you express yourself in your 5th house, your creativity and your joy. There was a pressure there, and there was sort of like a lesson in committing to that. I think that now that Mars has been sort of baptized by fire in your 2nd and the dragon's tail is gone, it does feel like a fresh clearing. It feels regenerative to me, Libra rising. There'll be ways in which you can take back control of your resources and how you wish to grow them and what you wish to do with them that was limited for quite a long time. November of 2021 was when the first eclipse in Taurus happened, starting off that push and pull between Taurus and Scorpio, between your 8th house of your obligations and the way that your energy and resources are interwoven with other people, meaning that you had to sort of put aside some of your solo missions. That's over now, and Mars has been cleansed in Scorpio. Mars is a difficult energy for Libras, as I said, to get their heads around. So let's go with it. Let's remember your soul's mission, which is justice, right relationship, fairness, equity. Remember also, Libra, that you choose the way that leads between the great 2 lines of force. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I want to really hold on to these soul mantras in times of tension, because I find that they can be really, really helpful. The one for Gemini is, I see my other self, and in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. That's by Alice Bailey, the one that wrote the book on esoteric astrology, the philosophy of. There's also another talking point to Gemini, which is let instability do its work. So if there's some sort of crisis of faith that you've been feeling at this time, Libra, this could be in relationship to using your whatever faith that you follow. It may have been difficult for you to ascertain or to hold on to that faith. We know that we sort of are going through a time of great injustice the world over, and our access to the news and to information reminds us that every second that we go to our phone or go to the paper, or there's always something new to learn about how unjust the world is becoming. And it's a crisis of faith. How can we justify that everything happens for a reason during times such as these? It's an impossibility. It's an impossibility to sort of sit in that statement or that knowledge. What I'm learning about astrology as a faith-based system, the system that gives my life great context and gives my Gemini moon a great moment to regulate and for the conversation to quieten a little. But we don't look to the sky and cast off what is happening currently in our lives or in our greater understanding of the human species. We don't justify it with the astrology. We can't. That's irresponsible. We have to keep our fury and our sorrow alive. There's no room for loving and lighting things away. And I don't think that the great philosophers or the great writers of astrology, particularly the contemporary ones, there's some beautiful, beautiful people that have devoted their lives to this and speak in perfect rhythm with how we use the movements of the planets. It's kind of like a mirror. And so, like Gemini, like the Lover's card, we can see our lives, our emotions, our feelings, our sorrows, our pain points reflected in the sky. And in that act, that ritual of analysis, we can bring back our Gemini-ness that sometimes does fly off the handle and does burrow into doom scroll. We can bring that awareness back to our physical selves. We don't use it to astrologize the pain away. We use it to process the pain. Hopefully. I hope that makes more sense to you, Libra rising, because it's been part of my inability to give horoscopes last moon, the new moon in Scorpio, was because it felt like a crisis of faith. And I have spent my entire life in such an intensely conflicted relationship with my ninth house. Speaking of, I'm a Pisces rising, so my ninth house is Scorpio. And the protection that I have built up in the face of organized religion, perhaps in the face of different avenues, different journeys with religion, and the manipulative qualities of those particular people that I was in company with, that had me with such a barrier to any sense of faith. It's taken me into my adult life to recognize that I'm allowed to have faith in something, but my love for my own spirituality doesn't discount the healing properties that other folks experience with their version of their own spirituality. But that's the point. We all roads lead to the same place. When a nonna holds her rosary and wears black for the rest of her life in grief, I believe her. When folks pray in times such as these for guidance, for hope, I've come to believe them. And I didn't before because I was protecting myself. Ninth house, Gemini. Hopefully that started a conversation for you to have too. The Eight of Pentacles has come out quite often in these readings so far, and the Eight of Pentacles does talk about diligence and repetition and work, honing a craft, becoming educated in something. Practice makes perfect is a great way to describe the Eight of Pentacles. And so perhaps what I'm seeing here is this Saturn involvement in your sixth house, which can speak to repetition and the grind and obligation, can also speak to repetition of skill. Perhaps there's something that you're learning or willing to learn that is maybe aiding your access to some semblance of faith. And in that repetition, you're finding a channel there. You're finding a pathway to some sense of hope. Because, I got the Ten of Pentacles too, which is a lovely feeling of satiation. It comes at the end of the cycle of the Pentacles, so we do speak to legacy there as well. Perhaps that's been on your mind, Libra rising. You've been thinking about, what am I going to leave behind? Like, how am I going to work with this inner trauma, outer trauma, this conflict, this echoing conversation of friction? I've got to find some way through. The King of Swords is someone who has a great capacity to work with their mind, as divergent as their thought processes may be as well. They've found the right tools to help regulate their nervous system, their intellect. They're incredibly smart, and they sort of know how to pick things apart too and look at the parts and put them back together. There's something quite analytical about the King of Swords. So perhaps this is something that you're sort of, through this grander feeling of worry, there's something that you're being really drawn to, that you can see yourself or see it as a part of your legacy moving forward. And so maybe over the next 2 years, this trial by fire that Mars has had, this new cycle of Mars that we'll be working with for the next 2 years, free of the dragon in your second house of your values. There's something that these pentacles that we're stacking up and putting away, you're going to find what that's all been for, and it's going to bring you back to some sense of faith. That was a nice reading, Libra rising. I hope that feels nice for you too. Yeah. You're welcome. We are coming into gift-giving season, so if you are wanting to buy a reading for a loved one, email me at yourok@umaruby.com, and I can arrange to send you a voucher for your loved one that you can gift them at the gift-giving season. If you'd like me to read for you, then by all means, book a place at umaruby.com via the bookings page. You can subscribe to this channel and support my work monthly if that's something, if your resources allow that. You can do that at buymeacoffee.com/umaruby. At this time, I would be very appreciative of that. You can also put some money in the tip jar at that same place, buymeacoffee.com/umaruby. The link is in the description below. Much love to you, Libra rising. Good faith and good healing for you moving forward. One thing before we go, actually, if you're still here with me, and this might sound trite, so forgive me. Speaking about faith and speaking about the sort of duality that has been conflicting me at this time, I was on a train of thought, and I was just sort of watching things to numb my busy mind, as I tend to do, which is probably a bad habit that I'm going to ease myself off, watching my computer before I go to bed. But I was on this certain algorithmic path, watching criticism about the pop star Madonna. There was a couple of dour comedians that were sort of putting together different critiques and things like that, picking apart. And I was not even laughing, but just sort of consuming that media until I switched and I started watching interviews with Madonna from my memory of being a young person in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And I started to remember how much I adored Madonna as an image, as a deity growing up, always. And then I started watching the actual art. I started watching Madonna in performance, in her music videos, and I started to cry and cry and cry and cry because I was moved by it again. And it's very queer to say that Madonna is part of my patron saints, but I'm not ashamed of that. And it was a great lesson in shifting focus from criticism, critique, into beauty. Gemini has access to that duality, and Gemini has the stuff to move from one to the next. So maybe if there's a certain slipstream of media that you're taking in right now, or criticism, it might be worth going back to the source and having another look. That's all. Much love to you, Libra rising. I'll be with you in 2 weeks to talk about the Sagittarius new moon. Ouch. And this is actually going to reactivate your house of the goddess. So maybe this Madonna talk weren't for nothing. Speak to you then. Bye. Hello, Aquarius rising. Welcome to your horoscope for the Gemini full moon happening on Monday, the 27th of November at 8:16 p.m. if you're in the Southern Hemisphere with me. And if you're close by to where I am on planet Earth, then you can look to moonrise for this moment of exactitude. When the moon just rises, it will be full, at its fullest. So if you can remember at 8:16 p.m., to cast your eye over to the eastern horizon, you can get the first look with me. Now, this is happening after the weekend, and the weekend does have some conflict straight off. The planet Mars, who has just gone through its baptism by fire with the sun in Scorpio, we're on a brand new Mars cycle with this motion. So this means that the next 2 years are going to be speaking to a lot of revelation. There might be a lot of things that are sort of, you have the bravery enough to bring up again after some time concealed away. However, the day before this full moon, Mars will form an exact square with Saturn in Pisces. Now, Mars and Saturn both are what we call the malefics of the zodiac, which can mean they're the planets or the energies, the cosmic bodies that have tougher lessons. They don't mince words. If we think about Saturn as being like the daddy of the zodiac, there's sort of like a boundary, a restriction, a tougher lesson. Think about a sort of father that perhaps is out of step with their emotions and is thinking that the best way to love a child is by critiquing them and by putting the goalposts further and further and further back. Not to say that I have daddy issues. Mars is vitality. Mars can be valor, bravery, it can also be aggression. So you can see when these two butt heads, it's almost like these two individuals from different generations are in direct conflict. So for you, Aquarius rising, we're talking about a friction or a frisson between your 11th house of your friendships, your community groups, your sense of humanity, and also your second house in Pisces, which is your values, your resources, how you wish to earn money, and how you're going to use that money, use those resources to align with your values. Now, Saturn, we know, has been in your second house since the middle of this year and will be there for the next few years. So this is a period of time when you need to sort of tighten those purse strings or learn how to budget, if you don't know how to kind of perhaps put things away for the future in ways that you maybe haven't before, or there might be some limitation there to the way in which you are used to using your resources. Perhaps your values have shifted or will have shifted over this transit of Saturn. So when thinking about this sort of connection between those two houses, this moon in Gemini, which is very conversational, the moon in Gemini, as we know, is quite Catwoman. I've really landed on that as my bit of astrological info and my contribution to the tradition. Catwoman is Gemini through and through. Fact. If you want proof, the moment that Catwoman was entered into my consciousness, implanted forevermore and has never left, was on the 16th of June 1992, when Batman Returns, the movie, was premiered. And the sun was in Gemini at 26 degrees in an exact conjunction with Venus on my birth chart, triggering my moon placement. But for you, this is your 5th house of your self-expression. So if you have Gemini placements, have a look to see what planets are in Gemini. If you don't, it doesn't matter. You'll still feel this. It will be sort of perhaps in support or in trine with your rising placement because it's air sign to air sign. But think about self-expression. Think about the sort of vitality and the sort of greater freedom of movement of the 5th house. And think about Gemini, which is very conversational. In tarot, it's a beautiful card. Gemini card is the Lovers. So there is that beautiful kind of mirroring, that connection of one and the other, how we long to see ourselves and our lovers, and how we hopefully can mirror our lovers in us. There's a mutual understanding here. Some folks say the glyph is 2 mirrors with light and love bounced off one another. The incredible astrologer Alan Oken speaks to that idea of the meaning of the glyph. There's no light without shadow, though, and this is what Catwoman's good for. The difficulty with duality, perhaps the two sides of the same coin. In harshness, in shadow, Gemini can be incredibly difficult internal conversation. There can be memories from times past that reveal themselves. We think about the character and how strange it is for an 8-year-old, which I was, to align myself and see myself so clearly in Selena Kyle. Selena, the asteroid, I might say, was in Gemini too in 1992. Back to this, though. I am talking a lot about this, though, because the 5th house can talk to our inner child. And so I'm describing mine to maybe for you to empathize and for you to see yourself there too. This difficulty with duality that might show up at this full moon is between yourself as an individual, your sense of belonging in the community, in your friendships, perhaps your concerns for humanity as well. And also this square, this pressurized sort of point is including your values, is including your resources. Now, at this time, we're all scrabbling around to figure out how on earth we can be of help at this time. It's hard, isn't it, Aquarius rising? The more masks that are falling off, the more is being revealed to us as far as the damage of governing systems of control. And we're being called to put our resources to best use. We're being called to put our time to best use. How can we be of benefit? How can we in some way aid, So maybe this is the conversation that you're having that's sort of conflicting. There might be conversations that erupt around this full moon, around mutual aid, around how you can put your resources to better help, to aid your humanitarian principles, which are very strong. Let's not forget that, Aquarius rising. But these conflicts, sometimes Mars can speak flippin' out of turn. The baptism by fire that Mars had was in Scorpio. So there is going to be things that are dredged up, that are revealed. Scorpio holds their aces close to their chest. They pull them out when the time is right. And so over the next period of time, the next Mars cycle around the zodiac, the next 2 years, there's going to be more revealed. So this could be the conversation that's happening. And if your shadow side, Aquarius rising, is lashing out, if your Catwoman is trying to protect your Selena at this time, if you're being triggered by the news or by conversations or by this feeling of helplessness, I want to acknowledge that that is valid and that I empathize with you and I love you, and we're going to take the time that we need to rest, and we're going to come back to this. Hopefully what we can see moving forward is community activation and coming together. We can see it already. There are multiple community actions around the globe at present. There are people showing up. There are people banding together, helping. So it might even be an internal conversation that you're having where you're sort of like, oh, this Gemini full moon is really lighting up my 5th house of my individual self-expression, my sexuality, my creativity, my joy. And there's a guilt that's sort of latent there too because of the other side of this coin. Let's get you some tarot and we'll see what we can come up with. I will show you the tarot card for 4 degrees of Gemini, which is where this moon will be playing out in your 5th house. It is the 8 of Swords, so there is anxiety there. There is multiple thoughts. Remember, the swords in tarot, as you know, are our mind, and the way that our mind operates, the way our mind can weaponize itself against us too. The 8 of Swords is a cage, and it's an opportunity, an invitation to remember that we have the power to move from this cage. We're not as trapped as we think we are. But let's get you some intuitive tarot on the table, Aquarius rising. Whew. What I will say is that Saturn, the planet, is actually on your team. Saturn, the daddy, the boundary maker, the one that brings tough lessons, is the ruler of Capricorn and of Aquarius in the traditional sense in Hellenistic astrology in the old days. And so there's something about the quality of Saturn, there's something about the personality perhaps of Saturn that is good for you in coming to a better relationship with your soul's purpose. You understand the importance of hard work, of difficulty, of working through difficulty. So maybe at this full moon, like don't, how to say it? There might be some steam that's blown off. There might be some anger. Remember what you're doing your work for. Remember that it is to benefit the greater group, that your humanitarian is really powerful. That's innate in your nature, Aquarius rising. The boundary over the next few years will be learning how best to articulate that. Yeah, so I got the 10 of Wands in reverse, which normally the 10 of Wands upright would be a feeling of absolute exhaustion and release, kind of like a sort of giving over, sort of like there's no more to be done. I'm over. But it's upside down, so it's not the case. It's almost telling me that there's more in you, Aquarius rising. Perhaps what you've been so diligently, ardently committing yourself to learning is testament to this card being upside down. The devil is definitely another moment where you come in face to face with conflict, more on an internal sense, I might say too. The figures in the devil are feeling like they're chained to that rhythm. They're a slave to that rhythm. But the devil empowers us. The devil says, I am your devil. I'm not an external source that is out to get you. This is something that's coming from within you. It's that shadow side, isn't it? Or it's that question of this imposed devil from the outer, the language that's used to subjugate, the language that's used to enslave, doesn't belong to me. And I know this. I'm going to be patient with this, but I'm going to move through this because your devil is not my devil. And that's some beautiful support from the Queen of Swords too. This is someone who's got an active brain, an active mind, who knows psychology really well. This could be work that you've been doing, Aquarius rising. This could be you've been learning about how the mind can sometimes play real tricks on us and how it sometimes locks us into a state of protection from danger that perhaps might not be so physically present. Trauma response, trigger response, all of those sorts of things, fight, fright, flight, freeze, all of that kind of stuff. You're learning about this and you're learning perhaps how to help some folks climb down from that ladder. And the Ace of Cups is your empathy. That's a beautiful offer. There's something that I feel, Aquarius rising, there might be some, I feel that there's like a sensuality to this reading for whatever reason. There might be powerful activation that you're involved in as far as really feeling out your body and finding the pleasure in that too. If that's the case, then I would fully support that. It might be, again, this ongoing conversation about how and where you should put your energy at this time, put your resources, and there might be some outer instruction as to where that should play out. But for you, at this moment, 8:16 p.m, if you're in the south with me, pleasure activation. Feel the love. Yeah. That's your reading, Aquarius rising. I'm glad to be back. Thank you for your patience in my absence at the Scorpio new moon. I have written about that if you would like to head over to the Glory Box section of my website. I did write you a mini horoscope. I was not well, so I couldn't commit to giving a video horoscope, but all seems in order again. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for being here with me. We are coming up to gift giving season. So if you are wanting to purchase a reading for a loved one, you can email me at urok@umaruby.com and we can organize a voucher for those people that you might think would need or would respond to a private reading with me. I'll draw out the chart. They look like this. And whoever I read for gets that chart posted to them in the mail after we're done. If you'd like to support my horoscope work, I would be very grateful for that at this time. You can subscribe to my work here at buymeacoffee.com/umaruby. It's $10 Australian a month, which really does help to keep me going. There's also an option that you can throw some money in the tip jar too at Buy Me a Coffee. Head to my website, Umaruby, have a look if there's another reading there that might trigger your interest. I'm ready and I'm capable and I'm able, and I can't wait to meet you if I haven't and to see you again if I have. Take care with the Gemini. I understand that difficulty with duality. Meow. Hello, Gemini rising. Welcome to your horoscope for the Gemini full moon, happening on November the 27th, which is a Monday at 8:16 p.m. if you're in the Southern Hemisphere with me. And if you're close by to where I am on planet Earth, this full moon is becoming exact at moonrise. So if you remember to cast your eye over to the eastern horizon at 8:16 p.m., just as the sun's setting and the moon is rising, that will be the moment of exactitude, to feel and to release everything that we need to at this full moon. I apologize for my absence, and I'm back in action. Now, I always think of Catwoman when I think of Gemini. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if Catwoman is a Gemini. I wonder if there's some Gemini placements there. And I looked up as far as I'm concerned, there is one Catwoman, and her name is Michelle Pfeiffer. And that movie was released on the 16th of June, 1992, at about 5 p.m. when they have Hollywood premieres. And I looked up the chart for that, and it just so happens that the sun was at 26 degrees of Gemini in an exact conjunction with Venus, which I think is really proves my point. Also, the asteroid Selena was in Gemini too, at I think 11 degrees. So yeah, sometimes astrology does wonderful things as far as giving us a sense of context for our predilections. Catwoman's an interesting character. Definitely there's a big essence of duality involved here, and perhaps a difficulty with duality too, which is what one of the great lines in the movie that I'm talking about is when Selena is flirting with Bruce at home and they're sort of trauma bonding. And Bruce says that his ex-partner, talking about exes, had a difficulty with the two sides of him because he had trouble reconciling them. And Selena says, was Vicky right about your difficulty with duality? And it's always stuck with me. And it just so happens that my moon placement is in Gemini. And so thinking about the light and the shade of life and the light and the shade of persona, maybe, and thinking about the sort of cosmic psychic connection that I have with this goddess, as far as I'm concerned, in the modern context. We all get to invent our own deities as time goes on and we move through life. There is something about Catwoman that's been with me since I was 8 years old in 1992 to now that it's shown up as a difficulty with duality. In the tarot, we look to the Lover's card when we speak about Gemini and the major secrets of tarot. And there is duality in this card. There is something harmonious and lush and beautiful about this duality. When I think about relationships, as is the Lovers, there's two folks, and the glyph of Gemini is those two mirrors that are facing one another. And there's light and love being bounced off and refracted from one to the next. That's a beautiful concept. There's also shadow as well, I might say. You got to take the rough with the smooth, baby. And if it's been rough, or if you're coming through a period of harshness, there's something that we can look to the parable of Catwoman and look to her inability to move past her trauma. We can also remember that in that movie, her trauma was very fresh and she'd been consistently downtrodden, and attempts at her life had been made and she'd been cast aside and used and abused. So that's a lot of trauma to deal with in 2.5 hours of movie. And so maybe at the end of that, we can give her a bit of space to allow the trauma to have its effect. Hopefully, there's going to be a sequel, and hopefully Michelle Pfeiffer will play the part again now, because I would love to see that Catwoman survived. So, how are you feeling, Gemini rising? How has your road to here been treating you? I'm looking at your 7th house in Sagittarius, which is your house of relationships of the other. So perhaps if this is you, then Sagittarius might be over here. And you can see in the tarot, the Temperance card represents Sagittarius, and there's an echo of those beautiful red wings as well. I like this. Temperance teaches us that we can mix and we can meld the variant aspects of ourselves together, particularly fire and water in Temperance. So our emotional selves, the way that our bodies react to circumstance or perhaps to memory. Remember that Gemini is an air sign, and that does talk to us about our mind. And fire, which is our magic, which is our drive, our passion, the parts of us that create something out of nothing, the parts of us that find patterns in the sky and bring them down here to earth. So your relationships have just entered a hotspot because the planet Mars, who does bring with it activation and vitality, has just entered your 7th house of relationships and is buddying up to the Sun. There was a Cazimi with Mars and the Sun in Scorpio about a week ago. And so that brings with it a fresh new cycle for Mars itself. And so we're working with this feeling of bravery right now. Now, unfortunately for us, there is a square that's happening, which you know is pressure. So the Sun is at 4 degrees of Sagittarius, the Moon is at 4 degrees of Gemini, and they are shooting up their pressure to Saturn in Pisces, which rules over your 10th house of your most public self, how visible you are in this world, and what you may wish to leave behind as far as your legacy is concerned. Saturn is the daddy of the zodiac. Saturn is the taskmaster, the one that brings harsher lessons to us that we have to deal with. So perhaps you might look out to some of your friends with Pisces placements and support them through this. Perhaps you know people that do have a Saturn in Pisces placement and they're experiencing their Saturn return right now, which can be tricky. It does sort of level us up and does sort of make us commit to the path moving forward. No matter which way that leads, it is a reckoning of some sort. So this lunation that is going to be, I would say, emotional, because full moons often are, but there's a pressure with some sense of boundary or some sense of shackle or restriction around the way that you move around the world publicly, what you wish to be known for, and maybe in some sort of Piscean way, something a little bit cosmic, perhaps quite full of empathy and tenderness. Gemini loves to talk, and this is why some folks with Gemini placements have a difficult time internally, because there is a growing sense of self-criticism, maybe on one side, and sorrow on that side too, with the malleability and the willingness to learn and to grow and to change. There's a changeability with all of the mutable signs. So Sagittarius, Pisces, and Gemini are all mutable signs. They give way in weather to the next coming season. There's an impressionability about us. And so at this time of pressure, with this authority figure up the top giving us a sort of riot act, reading us the riot act, there might be some pain points here for you. You might feel a little bit pressurized. You might need to pop your ears. Sometimes when I feel pressure, that's always my ears sort of, you know how you're driving up in a high altitude and you sort of get that air pressure that clogs the ears. That sometimes happens to me in my emotional self. I've come to learn as time has gone on. And so if we can feel it, and if we can actually feel it rather than compartmentalizing and putting it aside somewhere, then we can allow the body to move through that. Because if we don't feel it, then it's going to wait and it's going to spring up at an inopportune time. Now, we are moving towards a very sticky aspect. So Mars, as I was saying, is in Sagittarius. The day after or actually the day before this full moon, I might say, on the 26th of November, there will be an exact square with Mars and with Saturn. So exactitude is, it's something that some folks can time their watch to. It's also just an example of we're in this moment. The last time that there was a square between Mars and Saturn, so authority and restriction and boundary and lessons and vitality, confidence, aggression, it was 2 years ago. There's this pocket of time in November, December of 2021 that had a lot of similarities that are showing up now. The square happened in Scorpio for Mars and Aquarius for Saturn. That was at a time when Saturn was still in Aquarius. And if you can cast your mind back to that period of your life personally, and maybe if you can find the moments where there were some wires crossed quite severely, perhaps there were some arguments that sort of cropped up too. There might have been some things that were sort of dredged from the surface. Mars in Scorpio is quite good at bringing things up. The Scorpio, the sign we know, doesn't really let anything go. And so from my memory, there were some things that needed to be talked about, that needed to be addressed, and it was quite difficult. In the mutable signs in Sagittarius, which does wish to learn from this life, that is looking for the lesson, mutable fire is like candles, I think. It's having learned the magic of fire. And with Pisces, they both are ruled by Jupiter, these signs. So there is sort of like an optimism here. So hopefully this square won't be as brusque, perhaps, as 2 years ago when the last square happened. If we look at the minor arcana, so the moon is at 8 of swords. So the first decan of Gemini, and this is a card full of anxiety. There does feel like there's something about being bound and gagged here and being worried. I can definitely identify with this card over the past Scorpio season. For me personally, there was many moments where I did feel suffocated and I felt trapped by my own repetitive thoughts, my own fears were quite triggered over this time. So this might be something that we can look to Gemini, the Gemini in you, your soul's rising intention, the beautiful mission that you're here for, Gemini rising. It might be a time where you find that you need to chat it out. I'm going to get you some tarot before we run out of sand. After this full moon, we are looking at a week of some really beautiful Venus aspects. So if Mars is stirring shit up again, we can look forward to Venus, ain't it the way, the sort of femmes being the mediator and the coolant, the salve. Sorry to gender this stuff, Gemini rising, but it's sort of, sometimes it can be frustrating when you sort of, when you look at it from that lens. Venus longs for beauty and for pleasure and for art, creativity. So in those ways, we can maybe the week after this moon feel more in tune with our creative selves. Hopefully. There's another thing I'll say as I'm pulling these cards, Gemini rising. Mercury, which is your planet, the one that leads you along, Mercury is forming two aspects in tandem at this full moon in Gemini. One is with Neptune, which is tricky. You might be told that you're deluding yourself, or you might think to yourself, oh, I'm deluding myself. Because Mercury is in your 7th house of relationships, this could be information coming from people that love you. This could be information coming from people that you work with too, or have worked with. So there might be a tremor there of, you don't have the stuff, you can't do this. In exact tandem with that harsher aspect though, Mercury is forming trine with the dragon's head in Aries. So this is where we're going to be focused on. There's going to be influxes and deluges of extra energy in your 11th house of friendship, community, humanity. Remember all of those lessons that you learned over the past 20 months in your internal workings are being brought forward into active service into your 11th house. So there's also that happening as well. Whatever information or conversations, potential arguments that you're having with people in your 7th house, as far as delusion is concerned, there's also some doorways opening for how you can actually be of help and service moving forward. And I got the Hierophant right in the center. And in this version of, this is my secret tarot deck that I can't tell you who made it because I don't know. This was given to me by a very good friend who was also gifted it by someone else, a good friend of theirs. And they found it for $1 in an op shop. So and there's no access to the artist. I wish that I knew so I could say thank you. They have the Hierophant here as Marie Laveau. This is lovely. This is someone that we can trust. This is someone who has their bridge open to spirit world. This is someone who knows about healing and devoted their lives to ancient practices, ancient arts of healing. This is in the center of the reading for you. And it's surrounded by a lot of hard work, the 8 of Pentacles, so nose to the grindstone, get to work, and also the Page of Swords, which is the truth. Maybe you can personify the Page of Swords here. This is sort of feels like the beginning of a period of study. This is skills being developed. This is what I really feel for you, Gemini rising. So continue on that pathway. A full moon in the 1st house is probably a private time for you to sort of steal away for a moment and love up on yourself. But at the conclusion of this reading, what I can really see here is if there is conflicting perspectives or if there is confrontation happening in the house of the other that's had you question or had you sort of think to yourself, oh, I'm deluding myself, or this is not, I don't have the stuff to do this, is magic real? I'm not sure. We can work through that conflict, that confrontation, and we can also find a bit of beauty in repetition too. Get to work, keep learning, keep going, find the pattern. I love you very much, Gemini rising. Thank you very much for your patience with me as I get these out. That felt lovely. You can get your birth chart read by me. They look like this. I draw them out and I post them to you after our reading on Zoom. You can make an appointment with me at umaruby.com. If you'd like to book a reading for a friend, seeing as how we're coming up to gift giving season, you can send me an email at urok@umaruby.com and we can chat about how I can get a voucher for you for a friend. If you'd like to support my work here in Horoscope Land, you can head to buymeacoffee.com/umaruby and you can subscribe for $10 Australian a month. You can also put some money in the tip jar if you'd like as well. I'll be with you in 2 weeks. And we're going to speak about the new moon in Sagittarius. So for this season, we are going to be focusing on your relationships, and there'll be an opportunity with the new moon to make some wishes and to ask for connection, to ask for honorable connection that honors you as yourself and honors the many facets and sides and the multiplicity of your nature. We don't just bounce love and light to one another. Sometimes we reveal our shadow. And if we can do that in safe company, then we can encourage those that we love that their shadow is something not to be frightened of too. Take it easy. Much love to you.